It's time for Monster Energy Cup Series practice from Daytona International Speedway, Daytona Beach, Florida. Gorgeous afternoon for practice as these teams will get ready for the Coke Zero Sugar 400, which will be coming Saturday night as we look at the playoff standings. Now 2 drivers with 5 wins. Kyle Busch, the amazing finish at Chicago puts him in a tie now with Kevin Harvick for 5 wins already on the season. Martin Truex Jr., Clint Boyer, and Joey Logano and Austin Dillon, the drivers that are locked into the playoffs. Everybody else fighting for the points. Alongside Dale Earnhardt Jr., Jeff Burton, I'm Rick Allen. And Junior, we come back to maybe a comfortable place, even though I don't know if my energy level has come down after Chicago. That was incredible. But you've won here 4 times. We can still see some pretty incredible things happen, even during practice at this race.
Yeah, you said comfortable, but I don't know if you're really ever comfortable here because you just don't know what's going to happen around you during the race. You're trying to get to the end. You're trying to survive. Anything can happen, even though if you have the best car. It's trying to get to position on that last lap to be able to win the race, and it's not easy to do. So there's a lot of guys. The restricted play kind of levels the playing field, puts everybody into the race, and it's really anybody's race all the way down to the very end.
Bill France built this behemoth of a racetrack back in the late 50s. And Jeff, as a driver, when you come here, do you feel that sense of history and the greatness that has happened at this racetrack?
No question. I always wondered what it would have been like to be one of those guys when this racetrack was built. And you had to think, this man's crazy to build a track this big. And the history that's happened here, you know, and NASCAR being formed right down the road at the Streamline Hotel, all the things that have happened here, that makes this racetrack just unbelievably special. When you roll through the tunnel, I mean, there's this feeling that you get here that you don't get anywhere else because of the history and what this racetrack has meant to people that have won the Daytona 500, the Coke Zero 400. It's just such a special place.
Yeah, you talk about the history of this place. They used to race on the beach.
Yep.
And they built this racetrack 2.5 miles. There wasn't nothing even close to it in size when they built this racetrack. So this was like a crazy idea.
Yeah.
You know, just imagine everybody thinking that Mr. France must be the craziest man on the planet to put that kind of money and investment into something that had never been done before, nothing even close to this size. So, you know, and it's took off ever since. You know, it's lived up to that investment, and it's became the Super Bowl or sort of the backbone of our sport, the corner piece to our sport. And I love coming here only because of the history. I watched a lot of races here in the 80s as a kid down in the infield, running around and having a lot of fun. And only if I'd never had the success here, I still would love coming here only because of the history that the track has. So it's an amazing place to be at. When you drive in here, you feel it. When you drive across the racetrack on entering off turn 4, you see the size, and you're like, there's nothing like this. There's nothing to compare this to. So it's an amazing place, and when you win here, you know, especially if you win the Daytona 500, it's the greatest day a driver can have in NASCAR.
Use the word chaos, and we're starting to see cars rolling out onto the track right now. Junior, what do you expect to see? What do you try to learn in this first practice?
Well, it's got a little tougher to get a lot of experience in a pack. And what's happened over the last couple of years is the manufacturers are all getting together. And typically, if the guys aren't going out there to run single car runs, so you see out here Kevin Harvick on a single car run. If the guys aren't doing that, the manufacturers sort of work together and won't work with other manufacturers. So the Toyotas are all lined up and try to run together. The Fords will only try to run together. That's a decision that comes from the corporate desk in the organizations. That really isn't something the drivers show up to the track and devise this plan. This happens earlier in the week. They sit down and go, all right, all the 4 teams, we're going to work together. This is what we're going to do. The Chevy teams, they're all lined up here on pit road, all Chevys. And they're all going to go out there and run together, not because they want to, because there's no other manufacturers that'll run with them. So it's really interesting how that's happened, especially with how unpredictable the drivers say these cars are, Jeff, that they're not practicing in bigger packs.
Yeah, I know that the manufacturers are trying to get all the teams to work together, but I don't know it's in the best interest of the individual teams. I think getting out there and mixing it up with everybody actually makes you smarter, but you can see, Junior mentioned it, lane on the left that you're seeing, that's all Chevrolets. They're all lined up together. They've got a plan to go out together, and that's just what they do, Kelly.
Yeah, you know what they say about best laid plans, though, because I checked in with a few crew chiefs from each of the 3 manufacturers, and it sounded like some had loose plans to work together. For example, Rodney Childers on the 4, Kevin Harvick, obviously they're going out to make some single car runs, which was their plan, and they hope to team up with some of their teammates, possibly with some of the Penske Fords as well, to try to get a little pack run going. I checked in with Alan Gustafson. Of course, that would be one of those Chevy drivers with Chase Elliott. And he said he wants to do some pack racing, but he just wasn't really sure. He said they were going to kind of figure it out as this practice unfolded, if all the Chevys could get together. He kind of laughed and said, one thing I've learned in racing is that people don't really want to help out their fellow competitors much when we get here. So, and then finally on the Toyota side of things, I checked with Adam Stevens on the 18 of Kyle Busch, and he's not really interested in doing much pack racing, potentially with a couple of his teammates, but he's really just going out there to shake down that 18.
Well, that's an interesting strategy, Kelly, just because we've heard so much about the handling of these cars, that they don't handle well. And, you know, I just think that's interesting. I think you've got to go out in a pack. And, you know, one thing we've seen is I do think Chevrolet has been behind in regard to the teammates all working together. It seems like to me the Toyota camp and the Ford camp, they have come and said, okay, we're going to try to work together in the race. And I think the Chevy camp has been a little behind in that. And maybe this is the beginning of trying something different for the race, and saying, okay, in practice we're going to work together, and guess what, we're going to continue this in the race. I haven't been told that, but there's some kind of a signal right here being sent.
Yeah, they have to work together because there's no one else to draft with. The Fords aren't going to draft with them or work with them. We're going down in a 43 car here, the helmet cam on Bubba Wallace this weekend, so let's get in there and take a ride. See, this track's getting rougher, Jeff. I've been talking or heard from some of the drivers that new bumps, bumps getting bigger. This place is really smooth when they repaved it. Didn't have to worry about ride quality and the balance of the car and how the car might be affected by bumps like we had to last week at Chicago. Well, as you see by the helmet cam and the movement, it actually is getting a little bit rougher. Starting to have to worry about getting your car across them bumps, and if you're tight and you hit a bump, you get tighter. Or if you're loose and you hit a bump, you might get looser. So those are some of the things the guys are having to start to deal with on this racetrack as it starts to age and get some character.
A lot of respect gained by Darrell Wallace Jr. Bubba, as he finished second in the Daytona 500 earlier this year. He came back and said, you know what? The way you have a good finish at Daytona is you run up front. Stay out of those big messes that could possibly happen. So he wants to be up front as much as possible, and I think he proved that he can run up front.
We saw a little bit earlier, Bubba Wallace came on the racetrack. Look at the smoke coming out of the left rear. Sure, that's just a left rear tire rubbing. They try to get these cars that traveled when you leave pit road anymore. They're traveled already, but the rear end moves around the car just a little bit and drags the left rear quarter panel. So that's something the team will have to look at. It looks like it's clearanced itself, and a lot of times that's what you're hoping for, is that it's going to rub a little bit, then it'll push itself out after it's rubbed for just a few corners.
Really has to be a big weekend for Hendrick and Chevrolet as a whole organization.
Yeah, the organization's been pretty strong here over the last several years, but Jimmie has kind of struggled. It's been, you know, ever since he won a couple Daytona 500s here, he's been a little bit snake bit, and you know, we haven't seen him have that continued performance. But the speed's there in the cars. The 88 car's been on the pole here last couple races. The 24 car with Chase Elliott, when he was in the 24 car, was on the pole several races here. So they have the speed. I thought they looked good and were racy at the 500. Chase had a pretty good weekend. The cars looked like they handled well, and they were handling the new rule changes very well. But again, Jimmie has not had the opportunity to really finish these races,
right,
to be able to show what he's capable of doing. So I'm sure he'd love to turn that around.
We talked to him just before this practice started, and I said, Jimmie, you know, are you happy that your strategy of practice has changed? Because for years, Chad Knaus wouldn't let that car on the racetrack if there was another car out there. He said, you're running all by yourself, that's it. Now we're seeing him go out there in packs, and Jimmie said, yes, I'm glad he changed that strategy. I'm glad I'm out there running.
Well, that's because he wrecked in many races. Like, thing would just spin out on him. He would come off the corner and he'd be pointed in the wrong direction. So, you know, that team has really struggled with handling of their race cars, and you know, as we're looking at Jimmie go down pit road, working on pit road speed, something has changed this week for this race is the spoiler on the back of these cars is just a little bit bigger. They've added 5 inches of width to it, Junior, for a couple reasons. Number one, they thought they were going just a tick too fast, needed to get some speed out of it. But in addition to that, these cars, since they put them on the ground with no ride height rule, they have been a handful to drive. So just a little more downforce on the car, put a little bit of speed out of them. Austin Dillon trying to get on pit road. He didn't make it. He's trying a little too hard. It's okay, though.
The patriotic paint scheme of Austin Dillon. And
there's 22 car Joe Logano. They're a team, Penske, the whole organization, been super successful over the last several years at the plate tracks. And he's got a great spotter, TJ Majors.
I was just getting ready to say, did you teach TJ Majors how to be a great credit? Is he a great credit, or is he a great spotter because of the way that you taught him to be a great spotter? Because he went on to win with Joey Logano at a plate track.
He sure did. We're going to take a look at that way in Talladega. TJ was a great spotter when we started working together, and that's why I wanted to work with him, because he was a driver. He had been a driver in his past, and most drivers that decide to be spotters, they know what a driver wants to hear. So they're kind of pre-programmed when they get up on that spotter stand to give you that great information. And I felt like when these two teamed up, knowing how good TJ is on top of the spotter stand, that was only going to make Joey stronger at the plate tracks.
After that race on the radio, I remember Joey Logano thanking TJ Majors, saying, hey buddy, you definitely helped us get this win. And I thought that really is telling you how important TJ Majors has been to not only Joey's success, but the success that you had.
Yeah, I wish I could explain how important the spotter is at Daytona and Talladega, referencing some of the stuff we were talking about with William Byron there. A good spotter can really tell you what, you know, the 5 or 10 cars behind you are doing. And that information helps you understand which lane to be in, which lane to get in front of, and how big a run these guys are coming and how it's generating. And TJ would give you this information before it was happening. He could see that a line was forming and that energy was starting to happen that would create a run for that particular line. And you got to get that information early so you can make these moves that you need to make to put yourself in position to take advantage of that and make passes or maintain the lead.
And Rick, you can see the 18 there of Kyle Busch waiting to go out and make another run. You guys have been talking a lot about this new spoiler that's wider on these cars here. I talked to crew chief Adam Stevens about that. He didn't seem too pleased with it. The reason being they feel like they've been a little bit behind the 8-ball with their restrictor plate program. He said we closed the gap a little bit at Talladega, but the one area they feel like they had made some ground was in the handling of the race cars. And now with these wider spoilers, he feels like that's kind of taken some of that edge away. He said, look, the worse handling they can make these cars, the better it is for us. So he said, hey, we feel like we've raised the bar a little bit with this car we're bringing here to Daytona, but then again, so is probably everyone else.
And that's confidence in his driver and confidence.
That makes them better and gives them individually a better opportunity to win the race. But here at Daytona and at Talladega, the driver's been complaining about how uncomfortable the cars are and almost maybe looking at NASCAR to help them bring some stability back into these cars. But you know, as much as we hear about how uncomfortable they are, we don't see too many people out here putting themselves in enough race-type scenarios in the draft to learn about their car and improve it. It seems almost that speed is so important and being trimmed out is so important that it even trumps, you know, balance and comfort.
And even, Junior, we got two different packs. The pack on the right side, they're, you know, and the pack on the left side, they're too wide. But still, there's only 6 cars.
Yeah.
It's not like you have 40 cars out there. And the pack on the right, they're single file. Most Toyotas, you see Austin Dillon in that 3 car, he's got himself in the middle of all those Toyotas. But
yeah, they're all single file.
They're all single file. They're not really learning anything except for maybe how far the cars are going to travel, if they're going to hit something. The only way you can learn is to have 20 cars and go out there and try to race, to go out there and practice. And practice like we've seen here in the past. The negative of that is when we've seen them do it, they wreck. When they wreck, then the crew chief's like, well, man, you wrecked my car. Now I'm messed up. So that's the give and take. I think they should be out there at multi-cars and practicing and figuring out what their car can't do, and then the crew chief gets mad at me because I wrecked it. And it's just, I don't think there's an answer to that.
One thing different between the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series is that in the Cup Series, they can lock bumpers. They can try to do the pushing of one another and work their way as two cars up to the front. You can't do that in the Xfinity Series. You can bump, but you can't lock bumpers. So is there a strategy and a talent to that, hitting the car at the right pace or hitting it at the right area?
Well, I think the hard thing to do, the thing about the Cup cars is they don't really line up all that well. Everybody's car seems to push it forward, or you might not be able to push it forward, but you can push a Chevy. So, and it depends on where these guys have their rear heights set. That can also affect how easy it is to push a certain car. It just really has to be a situation where they line up just right. And it's still then, with how much, how unstable the cars are or have been this year, it's still a questionable decision on how hard you push a guy. And so you don't see it a lot in the Cup. And I think that's why there's no rule, because they don't really have that ability that they have in the Xfinity Series to lock bumpers. So there's no rule necessary.
And NASCAR worked really hard on rules to make it where you could push. They just work exceptionally hard. And everything you just mentioned, in addition, is just not as effective as it used to be.
Couple groups working together. How much are they learning? Are they seeing the air out there on the racetrack? See a couple drivers over 200 mile per hour average here.
Yeah, Denny's right. When back in the day when they could lay the spoilers down, they laid them down flat and almost unrealistically as far as how the cars drove and how the balance was when they laid them spoilers down. But that's what they had to do to go fast. NASCAR had to mandate spoiler angle. But Denny's talking about Dad being able to see the air, and what I took away from that when I would hear that is that Dad knew how the air went around the cars. And in my mind, it works like a boat wake. And so the air comes off the nose of the car and sort of creates a V. And the air shoots off the side of the car away from the car. It doesn't stay tight down the door. And that's why we can side draft. That's why we get up on the guy's quarter panels, because you're almost still in a draft as you would be behind the car if you're tight on his quarter panel. And so that was what I thought Dad meant when he said, man, I could see the air. He just knew where that air was going to be its most dense and where it would be the least resistance. Whether it was one car he was following or 2 or 3, 4 or 5 cars and cars side by side. He just knew where to go to find the least resistance from that air and the least amount of drag on his car. And
as you were saying that, we're riding along with Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and you could hear the RPMs go up as he got in behind. See, right now they go down. He doesn't have a car in front of him, but when he got behind 2 cars, the RPMs go up. You hear it at a higher frequency.
Well, now the 43 car is catching the group in front of him. Okay, and so that means the 17 is going to be catching them as well. So you hear in the corner, you hear the engine bog down. Okay, watch the RPMs, 82. Now he's on the straight, and he's getting a draft. So now the RPMs are starting to go back up. So the resistance that the corner creates.
Ricky Stenhouse Jr. has definitely separated himself from quite a few drivers as being one of the better plate race drivers.
Yeah, these races are, really what put Roush Fenway on the map last year. It's what propelled them into the playoffs. I think that puts a lot of pressure on them for this year. I think this is how they're going to have to work themselves in the playoffs, most likely. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. proved that he knew how to do it. Jimmy Finning, a longtime crew chief in the Cup Garage, he heads up this plate program for Roush Fenway, and they've brought fast race cars. We talked about Doug Yates and the power. That's the engines they got in these cars, but they also, with Jimmy Finnan's leadership, have done a great job of bringing speed to the racetrack.
I think you got to give Brian Patty, his crew chief, some credit as well. They qualify well. That, to me, not only a great sign of a good speedway program, but a sharp crew chief. Got to really get some speed and trim the car out. Ricky's aggressive enough to to show out on these plate races because it takes a guy that's aggressive, that's willing to put his car in some very questionable situations and throw difficult blocks that a lot of guys have a hard time pulling off. I think that's why Joe Logano runs so well, because he's aggressive, whether he's being on the offense or the defense. And I see the same thing in Stenhouse, and he was able to back up what a lot of people thought was a fluke by going to Talladega and winning there. We'll talk to them, see if they know some of the secrets.
They might tell you something now they wouldn't tell you last year.
They probably are going to be asking you the questions.
No, man, now that I'm on the other side, I'm going to see, it'll be interesting how the drivers react with me interviewing them. That's going to be completely awkward.
You're going to really
tune in, check it out.
Well, God will have a camera there for you.
You know what you're getting ready to learn is how much they were lying to you last year.
We'll see. We'll sit there nice.
Well, the last few seconds of this practice, we're seeing a little more action on the racetrack. Guys moving around, finding different tracks around the track.
We're seeing other manufacturers mixing in too. So that tells me that these guys are wanting to check that box. These are drivers that are like, hey, I need to get out there. Let me get out there and get around some guys so I can make sure that we don't have any concerns. Some guys aren't doing that. Some teams are just making single car runs, feeling confident that they're not going to have any issues. These guys, they definitely want to get out there and check it out. Also, you got guys like Bubba Wallace with a limited amount of experience. He's just out there learning, what works.
It's just so interesting to me because you said earlier that all the drivers talk about how bad they drive, that these cars all drive bad. And once you get to the racetrack, the only way to make it better is to work on the car, to make changes to the car to make it drive better. This is not a place like Michigan where you can lift.
Yeah.
If you get yourself in a situation where you're having to lift all the time and you can't be aggressive, when a hole presents itself, Rick, you got to drive in it. You can't hesitate and say, oh, I can't go there because my car doesn't handle well. You got to drive it in there, and if you can't do that, you don't stand a very good chance of winning this race.
Yeah. If you can't aggressively make moves, if you can't turn the steering wheel, if you need to turn hard left and get in and change lines, and even in the middle of the corner, you got to be able to do those things with confidence. If you're nervous about the back of your car and the level of grip you have, you're going to make less moves. You're going to be less offensive, more defensive. It's just going to be a day where it's going to be full of frustration because you're going to see opportunity but not be able to capitalize on it.
So we're going to look at some speed, some times, and how much weight do you put to these? Because these were all in packs. Guys like Clint Boyer, Eric Almirola, Brad Keselowski, guys that were over 200 miles an hour, they were in a certain spot in the track. That's why their average is so high.
Yeah, if I'm looking at the times, it doesn't really matter to me. This information is great, but I'm really watching the cars out on the track. What cars are getting runs, what cars aren't getting runs, what cars are great at pushing, what cars, when a car does get a run, how long does it sustain that run? Does it sustain that run for a lap and a half, 2 laps? Some cars, they'll get great runs and lose them before they get to the next corner. So you'll know those guys will be able to accomplish more on Sunday.
All right, I struggled in fantasy last week, so tell me which cars looked good in practice out here.
So there's the 88 looked great.
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching, that car's been fast the last several times we've been to Daytona with Alex driving it and with me driving it. It had a lot of speed. We saw in the February race, Alex ran really well for the limited amount of experience he had. When you don't have experience, you usually don't have a lot of help. But he did pretty good with the speed he had in the car, and it looks great again today, but it really comes down to whether the other drivers trust Alex when they're helping him that he'll make the right moves.
Maybe they trust that number.
Yeah, maybe so. It's leaning a little different way this year, but it's still got great speed. That may be across the company as at HMS, so we'll have to see. We'll get a little more practice here later today.
I think it's so hard to tell. When you're driving a race car, even when you're not 3 wide, you get a very good sense of who has speed and who can run up to you and who can't. Standing up here, it's really hard to tell. I want to see them when they're 2 wide, and it counts. I want to see them on old tires, who can really drive and who can be aggressive, and I don't know that yet because I haven't seen that yet.
Right.
So I've watched so much of these practices, and I think that guy looks really good, and I go watch them race, and they can't stay in the gas, and they can't do what they need to do. So speed will fool you here on this weekend, especially when it's hot. Tires are going to get old, so I'm going to wait and see who looks good on Saturday night.
In the first practice, 6 cars all averaged over 200 miles an hour here at Daytona International Speedway. Final practice for NASCAR Xfinity Series. That is coming up on the other side of the break.